Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 193 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Jeremy O'Neill, who is the Network Kids lead at Sandals Church. So he oversees all of children's ministry there at Sandals Church. And this interview was recorded a while ago, a couple months ago, before COVID kind of stopped us from gathering in person in our churches. So just want to give you a heads up about that. But we talk about a number of different things there. And next week, actually, we're going to have Justin Knowles on. And Justin is the student ministry leader at Sandals Church, but we recorded that interview last week. So it will be very relevant. We talk about student ministry pivots during COVID-19, but my conversation in this episode with Jeremy is very relevant because a lot of the things that he talks about still matter, whether your church is only gathering online for a while or you're starting to look to when you're going to gather in person again. And we just talked about a lot of unique stuff that's going on there at Sandals Church. A kind of a digital storybook that they create for their children's content weekly, how they write their own curriculum, how it's all Roku controlled on Roku devices. They create kind of a low prep storytelling option, for their leaders, and online service for kids, and a return rate. In fact, that's one of the things we talk about, like new families and how many of them come back, and that's something that they have measured and kept an eye on. And if you've been listening, you know that with Ministry Boost, we have created a new family retention plan that you can buy for just $25, but this is the last chance to get it for $25 if you're listening to this when it comes out. The normal price will be $99. You can get it at ministryboost.org. It's a full plan, 5-part framework to help families come back and get connected in your church when they start attending so that they will be retained. And so you can get that at ministryboost.org. Also want to give a shout out to our sponsor at ServeHQ. They create 2 products and more to come. And one is Trained Up, which is a great online platform for training your volunteers. And the other is Huddle Up, which is the one we've been talking about a lot more recently. And Huddle Up allows you to stop using clunky and unsafe communication tools in ministry. And this tool will help you, get your email, your text announcements, all the communication that you want to use with your team or anybody in your church, really. And you can get it all in one unified platform with great accountability built just for churches. You can find out more at nickblevins.com/servehq. You can get the show notes for this episode at nickblevins.com/episode 193. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Jeremy O'Neill about children's ministry at Sandals Church. Well, today I'm talking with Jeremy O'Neill. Welcome to the podcast, Jeremy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us about yourself and your family and your role at Sandals Church as we get rolling.
Yeah, so I'm Jeremy. I live in Southern California, actually born and raised here in the same city. I live like 5 minutes away from the house I grew up in. I'm a classic middle child, so anybody who knows things about middle kids, that's definitely my personality. I am still technically a young leader, about 28, which is cool. I can hold on to that for a little while. And let's see, what else, man? I am engaged to an amazing woman named Kendall. So we're in the middle of wedding planning season. So lots of things going on, man. It's exciting.
That's what month? What's the month and date of this thing? I'm like, how stressful is it, I guess, is what I'm really wondering. Probably not for you as much as for her.
Oh, definitely more for her. Yeah. So we're getting married in mid-July. Actually, for your listeners, they'll get a kick out of this part. The only date that was available was the last day of summer camp for us. So that will be a crazy month. But you know what, man? My fiance is a huge planner. And so most of our stuff is kind of already set. She's awesome about that stuff. And all her dreams are going to come true. And that's what matters.
Hopefully nothing goes wrong at camp, right?
It always does.
That's what you're hoping for. That's awesome. That's great. Well, tell us a little bit about Sandals Church for anybody who's not familiar, and I don't believe we've had anybody on the podcast yet that's worked there. So tell us about Sandals Church, and I know you've been there, a few years, so just give us a picture.
Yeah, so Sandals is a multi-site church, mostly in Southern California. We actually just opened a location in Central California, so we're figuring that out, what remote campuses kind of look like. But we've been around since 1997. We were founded by the same guy who's still leading our church. His name is Pastor Matt Brown and his awesome wife, Tammy. And so, yeah, I mean, the vision for our church has been the same all along. Our vision is to be real with ourselves, real with God, and real with others. And that really shapes everything we do in all of our environments, from kids all the way to adults and everything. So it's pretty exciting. We've been growing like crazy. I mean, we were talking before we started recording just about the pace at which we've been opening campuses. This is year 3 for me. Most of that time here on staff at Sandals has been in the current role I'm at, leading the kids ministry. And in that time, I actually did the math. We've launched 7 new locations. And so that's been probably the biggest thing on my plate is how do we launch kids ministries well in new locations and not interrupt all the other things that are happening in our ministry at the same time. So yeah, man, we've been in a season of growth. It's been exciting to see what God's doing and where he's leading us. And seems like we're just on for the ride.
That's awesome. So how many locations is Sandals Church right now? I don't think I was aware just of how many locations you have.
Yeah, so we just launched our 11th location. So we're starting to get up there. It's fun.
Yeah, so you were 3, 4, and then 7 in 3 years or something. So it's really changed in just the last few years.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even the mentality of our programming has changed a lot too. I mean, like a lot of churches that grow, we started being with our largest campus, kind of being the driver for the other campuses.
Sure.
And so the staff there would be doing everything and everybody else would kind of just adjust. And so over these last few years, we've had to kind of learn how to operate a little bit more efficiently and create a team that can support that largest campus so they're not doing all the heavy lifting. So it's been a lot of change for us. It's been exciting, but it's been a lot to adjust to for sure.
Yeah, and I want to ask a little bit about how that multi-site thing works, particularly for anybody who's in that context. But even if you're not, I always feel like the helpful thing about talking to a multi-site church is whether your church is large or small, usually they have both and everything in the middle, and you can kind of get all those contexts in one conversation. But at the campus level, tell us about children's ministry. Like, what's programming look like? What's, typical Sandals Church children's ministry for people that attend your campuses?
For sure. Yeah. I think, we use the large group, small group model for most of our environments. All of our elementary environments use large group, small groups. So they'll start all together, typically in one big room, and we'll do the first half of service, cranking out worship and the story and hosting and all that fun stuff. And then the second half of service will be small groups. And our early childhood ministry is similar, but most of that typically happens within one classroom. So they're having that whole experience there. They'll have their worship. They'll have their storybook. That's something we create. So instead of a video like elementary, we actually create a digital storybook that leaders can read to the kids. And so it's super fun. I mean, just imagine story time with a mom and dad to their kids, but in a classroom. So we have a lot of fun with that. And that's kind of the short version of our programming. Obviously, it's going to look different from one campus to another. We've got one campus that does 1,000+ kids on the weekends, and they're all over a big building. And then there are other locations where we have 70 kids on a weekend, and their building looks really different. So, but that's the core of what we do, kind of that large group, small group thing, and definitely the storybook is a pillar for our little ones.
Now, the digital storybook, what does that mean, digital storybook? Like, they use it with like an iPad, and that's how they're even telling that story? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so, all the stuff we use at Sandals, we actually have a team of content creators where everything for kids is original. I mean, our story, our worship, our leader guides, you name it, all of it is handmade by our team, by a small but really talented team. And so that storybook that we have is used primarily on screens. So we'll have like a nice big flat screen in a lot of our kids' environments for early childhood. But there are some where, we couldn't invest in a full screen, or there's some logistics there. And so there are some rooms that'll use an iPad instead. And really all it is, we didn't use anything crazy technical. We just created slides, So it actually started not being a digital storybook. We actually wanted to create a real storybook. What we found though is that was just going to be really hard. I mean, the logistics of like printing and publishing all those books and getting them to campuses on time and all that was just a lot. And so we found the more efficient thing to do was just create something that we could throw on screens and treat it the same way. So it's just like story time, but because it's on the screen, more kids can actually see what's going on. We realized that even if we did have this really nice fancy storybook that leaders could read to kids, what about the kid in the last row? There are some rooms where we have maybe 20 kids in the room for something like this at times. And so having it on the screen has actually allowed that to be a little bit more accessible. So it's worked really well for us so far.
Now, did they I have like so many questions just about the digital storybook. Like if I had a picture or something, I'd probably know, but do they manually control it? Is somebody else controlling in the back no different than a normal Pro Presenter or, PowerPoint slideshow thing? Or do they have control of it as they're teaching it? And then, tell me that first, and then I have another question.
Yeah, actually, so here's the thing. Sandals Church, we place a huge value on creating some of our own tools, our own resources. And so we actually don't even really use ProPresenter much at all in our kids ministry. We actually built our own app for Roku devices. So we'll download this app to a Roku device, and we built it in such a way where you can load all your content into a USB, you plug it in, and then you don't even have to have Wi-Fi on Sunday morning. So we're not even competing for bandwidth for worship and production and things like that in the main service. And we'll use this kind of Roku remote to just go to the next slide and do everything. So the entire service for early childhood and elementary is actually ran through a Roku. So whoever's on stage has the remote in their hands and they can just go to the next thing whenever they want. And so we created some cool bells and whistles that allowed us to not have to sacrifice production quality. For example, we wove it in so that we could have some like background music going on while an elementary host is kind of doing their spiel. So stuff like that, we're like, okay, cool. At the press of a button, we can turn it on or off at any point in time. So before we start worship, we'll turn that music off, or when we're in a more serious mode, we'll do that. We even created ways to kind of loop videos a little bit, so you can have some nice seamless graphics on the screen to keep kids engaged. But that's how it's all run. So when people are using that digital storybook, they're in control the whole time. Whoever the storyteller is, they flip to the next thing whenever they're ready. So that has allowed it to be, I think, a little bit more seamless because you're not managing communication between a separate production person in the back. Actually, the storyteller, has control of the pace of the story, which works out pretty well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's actually just like something people that listen to this have probably heard me talk about it, but that another organization we know of, they created the same kind of solution. It's like digital signage that's the original idea of it, is you can use it for digital signage to think like in your lobby, you've got graphics and videos rolling on a schedule or whatever, which is great. And that was what it was designed for. But then this ability that you're talking about to manually control it and then kind of use it in rooms almost in place of a Pro Presenter or whatever is something they've added. And it's funny because I feel like in church world, at least, that's more in demand, than the digital signage is. Now, I think churches should do both to really leverage media. But it's just one of those things where a few years ago, it was hard to find anything like it. And it's cool now that you guys have created your own solution. I know of another solution. There's this one that we kind of partner with them to help churches be aware of it. And the thing I like about the one we partner with, of course, is that it's pretty affordable, because that was the other thing, is most churches can't do like what you guys did and develop their own custom solution, or you could go out there and get something, but it's going to be really expensive. So I like that this is in the middle. Now, when they're doing this digital storybook, what are the slides like? I mean, do you guys create custom graphics, or is there your own videos? So is it kind of like, it's not just, I don't want people to think it's just like slides and a presentation and there's text with a nice background. Right.
Yeah, definitely not that.
Yeah, more to it than that for sure. Right. So yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. The stuff that we create is pretty incredible. We've got a team of content creators. There are 6 creatives and 1 project manager. It's not a big team, but they're super talented. And the storybook, that piece that they create, obviously has these beautiful animations. So imagine any storybook really that you're going to go find at a bookstore that a parent might pick up. I mean, we shoot to have the same quality is any of that kind of stuff. So we have animated characters, we have animated things on there that are age appropriate and fun for kids. And so, the style of animation may look a little bit different from one series to another to reflect whatever kind of feel we're shooting for, but it's high quality graphics. And what makes it, I think, a little bit more user friendly is just like a normal storybook, we actually have like what you read to the kids on that same slide. So it looks like a storybook, and the leader who goes up there, whoever like leads that time, they don't need to memorize a script. They don't need to be fully on point. Like they can actually just follow the cues that we put on the screen and just be fun about it. So I think it makes it a little bit easier to implement because of the way we did that. But for sure, it's a really high quality animated storybook that just happens to be on a screen.
Yeah, and then you create all the content around that. You and I talked about hopefully we can get some of your kids' team that creates this content on the podcast as well, which I would love. That'd be a lot of fun. But just give us a little bit of an idea of what all is involved as you all create your own content. I mean, you got multiple staff just doing that, right? I don't even know how many. And how long has that been going? Just tell me. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're creating your own curriculum and what that looks like.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I will definitely second that and say that we should bring them on the podcast, man. Some of the stuff that they are working on is so creative and innovative. I mean, the way that they think about engaging kids, I think, is just really different. I think, now I don't want to be critical or anything, but I feel like from a lot of publishers, it feels like we're doing the same things. Like there's not a whole lot that really feels like it's all that different out there. And I think what our team has really created is some stuff that's just different, and it may not be for everybody, but it's uniquely made for us, and it's original. We appreciate that. So, as you can imagine, it's a big project to pull off. I mean, we've got 6 content creators, and we've got a video person, a design person, a sound guy, and all kinds of things like that. And then we've got a project manager who kind of keeps us all focused on point. And, the turnaround for a series takes a while. I mean, that's actually been the biggest bottleneck for us that we've been trying to figure out is how can we reduce that turnaround time? Because we don't have an army of designers or video people or curriculum writers like any major publisher does. We just don't have that luxury. But we've been doing it for the last couple of years. We started, I think, in 2018. I think we did a series right after Easter, and we kicked it off then. And that was the first time that we started to do original curriculum every week. Before that, I think we experimented with a few standalone series that we would place kind of in the middle of a year. And so it was a lot more easy to pull off, if you only have to program for, 10 to 12 weeks a year, and then everything else you're using a publisher. But at that point, 2018, we fully committed, hey, every single Sunday, we're going to be doing our original content. And that was kind of the first round of what we did. I think we did about a year of programming there until we realized, hey, we need to rethink a little bit of what we do and how we do it. Most of it really revolving around our processes and how we can do this more efficiently and in less time. Because what was happening, our biggest struggle was this was taking so much time to produce that sometimes campuses weren't getting the assets they need for this weekend until late in the week, Thursday, Friday, or there was one time it was a Saturday. And, that's just super stressful. Our staff needs to be able to build around the content we're creating. They need to be able to have time to plan and prepare. And so we took about a year off. Where we just totally rethought our whole process. We got a lot more efficient. We even put in some quality control things in place so that we can run it by our pastors to make sure everything's theologically sound. We can run it by some experts who are our teachers who can make sure that what we're creating is developmentally appropriate, all the while trying to figure out how we can do this even quicker than we were before. And so in that year, as we were rethinking how we do all of this stuff, we were also spending a lot of that time catching up and creating a few series that we would have under our belt before we even relaunched. So what that's allowed us to do now is make it so that we're several months ahead of any given weekend. So now we're working on stuff that we're going to launch in the summer, but everything before then is basically done. So that changes everything for our team. There's not that sense of urgency and, man, we're getting behind the ball and I'm super stressed. And then things start to spiral a little bit. Our staff is able to see this stuff further in advance and they can plan accordingly. It's like, what if a campus wanted to build a special event around something in our series? Well, now they can do that because they see it further in advance. So we've been doing it since 2018, took a little bit of a break. And now I think the way we're going about things is a lot more sustainable, because we've taken the time to really think about the best way to do our process. So that's a little bit of a glimpse there.
That's awesome. Tell me about sandalskids.tv. I saw that I'm on your site right now, and I saw it. I'm clicking around, but tell us what that's about and how you use that.
Yeah. So, when we relaunched last November of 2019, one of the things we added was a platform where we could kind of make this stuff available to kids and to parents. And so what you're referring to right now is a website that we built. And I think the easiest way to think about it when I'm explaining it to other churches is I just tell them, hey, we created kind of like YouTube, but only for our content and only for our families. And so everything we create goes up there. So all of the story videos we do, all the worship songs we use, all that is up there. Even those storybooks that I was describing, we even load those in so that if there's a mom or a dad who wants to use that as a bedtime story, they can. And, we created some code in there so that it kind of feels like a storybook. So when you flip the page, it has kind of that flip the page, like animation kind of thing. It's just a resource for families so that everything we create can be accessible to kids and parents beyond Sunday morning. And the other thing we're experimenting with that platform is even trying to figure out what it would look like to have an online service for kids. Almost every church I can think of does an online service for adults. I mean, that's pretty commonplace now, but I don't know if I've seen the same thing for a kids ministry. So we take all that stuff that we created, our story videos, our worship songs, all that stuff, and we compile it into more of like a 30-minute experience where kids on Sunday mornings, if they're traveling to another place or they just can't make it to church that day, like they can actually like watch online the same stuff that their friends are seeing there. Now, they can't get the same kind of small group experience there, so really that online service is only the first half of service. It's why it's only 30 minutes and not 60 minutes. But that's something we're experimenting with. We've been doing that for a few months, just trying to see if that's something that kids really want, if families really want. We haven't really seen that in many places. So it's kind of just one big experiment right now.
Yeah, I mean, you described it well when you said it's like your own YouTube channel and custom content. That's exactly what I thought when I saw it. It's like, this feels like a YouTube channel and a YouTube show. Even the little thumbnails of your videos feel like that, but you don't put this content on YouTube at any point?
We put some of it on YouTube. I think what we decided is that there's two types of content we create. Some of it is just fun, silly content. Like, for example, one video we create each week for elementary is what we call a pre-show video. So the first thing we play before we even get into the real service is just a fun video to start the day off in an engaging way. And it also helps kind of to get the kids' attention. If they're all in one big room and they're all doing their own thing, once this video turns on, it's kind of a cue that like, all right, let's grab a seat. We're going to watch this. And it fills that time really well. But in that video, we're not telling any biblical truths. We're just doing fun things. Like one of them, I think our team went to the zoo, and we just put like kind of like a vlog style video of our visit to the zoo and all the cool things they saw, and kids just loved it. Or sometimes we'll play silly games and just shoot a video of it and play that with kids. So when it comes to fun content like that, we'll put that on YouTube because we think that'll give us a little bit of traction there, especially publicly outside our church. But typically, when it comes to something like a story video or our worship songs, most of that lives only on our .tv platform.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, at first I thought maybe it was like when I first loaded the page, I thought maybe it was like a bunch of YouTube embedded videos, but then I could tell it wasn't. It's like your own content. And I did page through a storybook there too while we were talking. That's great. Give me an idea. I was thinking about this in the beginning. We were talking about Sandals Church. You got this pretty large team. Sounds like 9 or 10 people creating this content. And you mentioned kind of the original location of Sandals Church, but overall, what size is Sandals Church attendance wise? And then how many kids overall attend that are, this content is being created for?
Yeah, so these days we'll probably have about 10 to 11,000 people on site, and that's not really counting online engagement, but we'll typically have at campuses about 10 to 11,000. So for kids, really it's somewhere north of 2,000 kids on any given weekend across our campuses. And so some it'll be as much as 2,300, others will be 1,900, 2,000, but that's kind of where we've been living for the last few months.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, obviously churches anywhere near that size are rare. There's not many of them. But the ones I think of, a lot of them do create their own curriculum, right? Some of them do. Actually, a lot of them don't, but some do. But I feel like what you guys are creating at that size is pretty robust. Like it's probably feels like, I thought you were going to tell me Sandals was 25,000 or something like that in attendance just because of the quality and that you're creating with that curriculum. So good for you guys. It's a really cool thing. I love how you're even thinking about it, how to engage with parents. And then online, you're right. There's not a lot of that happening, online service for kids or some kind of content. And I could even see, you said you bundle it up and make it like a 30-minute thing. I mean, obviously kids, if they can, they like to live on YouTube. So if you can reach them there, I think that, that'd make a lot of sense if they're not at church that Sunday for whatever reason. That's pretty cool. Well, I want to shift gears and I want to ask you about what are some things that are going well, and then just dive in and so we can kind of learn, from what is going well at Sandals. And so what stands out? What's going well with Sandals Kids ministry right now?
Man, I think I could probably spout off a lot of things. I just love the stuff that we get to do. But man, as we think about what's going well, what's not going well, I think a lot of that comes down to me, and this is weird. Some people might not be excited by this, but I am. Really, one thing we rely on a lot is data and measuring some specific things, and not in a way to try and quantify something spiritual. We're not trying to make it corporate like that. But I think one of the things that helps us be successful as a church is we measure everything. I mean, all the time. We survey everybody. We survey staff, volunteers, parents, even kids. We're actually doing that in about a week. And there are various things we measure. And along the way, what that allows us to do is figure out like, hey, where's God moving? Where is momentum building? And what are the things that we can invest more into? And also, what are some of the things that maybe we thought it was a great idea on paper, but it's not reaching the goals that we want it to reach. I think for a lot of churches, I can think of even the church I grew up in, we didn't measure a whole lot. And so when somebody came up to me and they asked me, hey, how's your ministry doing? My answer was always the same. Oh, hey, it's going great. We had a bunch of kids this weekend. Kids had fun. They were smiling. And those things matter. But I had no real way of knowing if our ministry was thriving or if we were struggling. And so I had a conversation with one of our team members, our staff members, a few months ago, and he said something to me. He said, Jeremy, I think one of the reasons that Sandals is growing the way that they are is because we measure so often. He's like, if something's not working, we realize it really, really quickly and we adjust accordingly. And if something is working, we go invest more into it. And I think when he said that is when I started to realize all of these things. And so for us, there's a lot of stuff we measure that informs what we do ministry-wise. Like, for example, one of the things that we're tracking right now is return rate. How many kids who come to our church for the very first time actually come back? Like, that's a big deal. I think maybe more than any other statistic about your kids' ministry, this is going to tell you a lot about how you're doing, right? Because if you don't have a welcoming environment, if your leaders aren't prepared, they're not warm and friendly, if your environments aren't great, people aren't going to come back. You can't always control how many people check out your church for the first time, but you can control how many of them come back. And so I think return rate is huge. And what we did when we started measuring this, we would do it monthly. And so we'd say, okay, all the people who came in September, how many of them actually came back a second time? And we get a percentage there. And we do the same thing for every month. And as we started doing this in 2018, And we noticed some patterns. We noticed that there were certain months of the year where families were more likely to come back than other months, right? So August and September, and then January and February, the percentages of kids coming back a second visit for people who came during those months was way higher than it was in March and April or in the summer or various other times in the year. And we went back, we looked at 2017, we looked at 2016, and we noticed the same thing every year. And what we realized is there is an optimum time for people to check out your church, right? Because if it's in August and September or January and February, what do we know about those times of the year? We know that that's a new start for a lot of families. And we know that that's a chance for them to adjust their family rhythm, right? Every family, when you come into back to school season, is thinking, okay, what's our new routine that we're going to do? Maybe my kid's going to a new school. Maybe there's this new class I want them to be a part of, or this new sport I want them to do. And they're more open to committing to certain things, church being one of them. And so when I presented these findings to our executive team, I used the example of football because I'm a big sports guy. And, I just mentioned, hey, the object of the game for football is really simple. You're trying to get to the end of the field and score a touchdown, right? And most of the time when you get the ball, you're going to start on the 20-yard line, which means you've got 80 yards to go to earn a touchdown. Well, what if you have a really great punt return, or they had a really bad kick and you get to start on the 50-yard line, right? Now you've only got 50 yards to go to score a touchdown. Like, which possession do you think you're going to have greater odds of scoring a touchdown? Of course, it's at the 50-yard line. And so really what I came back to is that there are certain times of the year where families are giving us an extra 30 yards. They're giving us an opportunity to be more likely to become a part of our church and ultimately to experience life change as a result of it, to be part of community and to invest in their kids in a meaningful way over time. So stuff like that has informed how we program, because now instead of doing an invite event in the middle of a semester, we actually target it typically during January and February and August and September. And for us, there are kind of like three different types of events we might do throughout the year. One of them is an invite event. The other two, and these are just my own terms, one is to develop people, right? Maybe you have a parenting class, maybe you've got a thing for your volunteers, but the goal of it is to help people grow. And then the third type is a serving opportunity. So maybe there's an outreach project in your community. So if you've got invite, develop, and serve, like now that you have some of this data, you can put some of those invite events at the beginning of the year or the beginning of fall, knowing that more of those families are going to come back than if you tried to get them to come in October or November. They're less likely to actually adopt church as a regular part of their new rhythm in those types of months. And then in those months that maybe aren't ideal times, maybe that's a great opportunity for a developing kind of event, or maybe it's a really great opportunity at the end of a semester for a serving opportunity for kids or families or really anyone in your church. So I think the data that we've been working on, and I don't know what it looks like for other churches. We haven't asked them about it, but for us, that's allowed us to discover some things that I think are going to help us serve kids and families even well. And so it may not be exciting to everybody, but it gets me pretty riled up. I'm excited about it.
Well, it's exciting for me because I love data. I just think, like you said, it informs better decision making. I remember, I think the quote that John Acuff put in his most recent book, Finish, was like, data prevents denial, which prevents disaster. Mm-hmm. So that's like the negative, not the negative, but the side that protects you from some bad decisions. But I think it also like you're saying, and can inform better, help you make better decisions. Is there anything, I know I'm hitting you with this off the cuff, but is there anything you could share with us about the specifics? Like, what is the retention rate? I've measured that before with our kids ministry. Now, sometimes what I've looked at it's more about how many of them stuck. Like how many of them are still there a year later, not so much about how many came back a second time. Though I've looked at that in spurts too. I just won't remember the numbers, but I can remember, what they are for, retention long-term. But is there anything you could share that help people? Because this is one of those areas where very few churches do it. So there's not a lot of good benchmarks out there. You know what I mean? So I think it's just helpful to hear what others are seeing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it all comes down to how you measure it. Right. I mean, for us, we're only worried about them coming back for a second visit. We think that's the key next step. And so Well, I shouldn't say that's the only thing we're worried about, but that's the main thing we're measuring, because we believe if you come back a second time, your odds of actually like sticking are significantly higher. And so that's what we're shooting for. So based on how you measure it, your stats could be different. For us, we chose a very simple way to do it. It's not rocket science. In fact, somebody out there probably has a better idea of how to get this data. But what we did is we would take a random month. So let's use September. We'll stick with that example. So if September, we want to know all of the kids who came for the first time in that month. What we'll do is we'll give them 2 months to come back. And so we won't actually measure that until, the end of November. So if they come in September for the first time, we're hoping that sometime either in October or November, they'll come for a second visit. We feel like that's plenty of time. Now, that's probably a longer on-ramp than we need. We could probably be more specific if we wanted to, but that's how we measure each month. And, for us, I think once we started measuring, we realized that our average month, about 50 to 55% of kids would come back a second time. Now, I don't know what's normal. This isn't something that I've really talked about in detail with other churches. So I don't know if that's winning or losing. But what I can say as the leader is it didn't feel right. Like, it didn't feel okay to me that we were only having 50 to 55% of kids come back. And so, our goal really is 60% every single month. That's the goal, is 60% or more. I feel like, even without knowing other churches, that feels like a realistic and healthy goal for how many we want. And so when we have those months like August and September and January and February, we get close to that on a pretty regular basis. We get close to 60%. When you have months in the middle of a semester, there have been a couple times where we've dipped even a little bit shy of 50%. So we're talking 48, 49%. There's a little bit of fluctuation there, and we're still trying to figure out what's normal. But because we're not really hearing some of this stuff from other churches, we don't really know. And so all we have are our own internal goals. And for us, 60% is kind of what we're shooting for.
Yeah, I know. There's a book called What Every Pastor Should Know. It's an older book. Tony Morgan references that a lot, or actually he's talked about it so much now, I don't think he references it anymore, but he'll even use a benchmark for, which is also from that book, the idea that as a church, you should have as many guests in a year as you have as average attendance in a week. Now, again, what's guests? And I think when they're saying guests, it's not just people that fill out cards. It's basically anybody you can count. If they've ever made themselves known in any fashion, you could count them. But what's happened is, when he, surveys churches, which they get a lot of good church data, the reality is that people are getting about half that, so a church like Sandals, let's say you're 11,000, an average church is getting 5,500 guests total in a year. And he's pushing, can you get it to 11,000? Or, your typical church that might be 300, can they get 300 guests in a year? Like, that'd be really good. But the data is showing that it's about half, they're getting about 150. But in that book too, there's a thing, and I might get the numbers wrong, but I'm pretty sure, again, this is more about retention, not just a return. But it was the idea that you can probably keep 20% of your first time guests long-term, 40% of your second time guests, right? Because if they come back, there's a better shot. And 60% if they, come back a third time or more, you're going to, your chances of course go up with keeping them the more they come back. But to me, it sounds like 50 to 60%, like you're seeing, is probably pretty good. It doesn't seem like it, right? Because you're like, man, what? We're losing half the people, or, almost half the people. And who knows? It'd be great. Maybe you guys could push at that and be different. But I would tell you from my experience, that I think that's really good. A lot of churches can't keep long-term even 30% of guests. So if you get, 50 to 60 come back, your odds are probably pretty good. It'd be interesting for you to go back and look at, okay, how many are here a year later? You know what I mean? Yep. That way you have both pieces, like how many come back a second time. And then if you see, this is where we get to nerd out on the data. You can look at them even in categories. Like if you came back a second time, what were the percentage you're still here a year later? 3 times, you could do the same numbers that book tried to do. Is there anything else that data wise that you've been looking at that's like, this has been intriguing or surprising, or this is informing a decision?
It informs a lot. What we were just talking about is kind of hard data, but I even mentioned earlier, we even have some things that kind of qualify in soft data in terms of like surveys. So, for me, I've identified 4 key target audiences for our kids ministry. Obviously we've got our volunteers, then we've got our parents. Ultimately, we have our kids. And then for me, not for everybody, but for me, the 4th audience is our staff, right? That's another group of people I'm interested in. And so we survey all 4 of those, even kids, multiple times a year. And so, the data we get back from that informs a lot of what we do. We just sent out a survey to parents, for example, and it was just yesterday, so we've still got some things rolling in and more to come. But you can already see initial trends of here's where we're killing it, and here's where we need more attention. And I'll even be transparent here, because I don't think it's a problem to share this, but we ask parents to rate a bunch of things 1 to 5. We want to actually have like a number to see how well we're doing or how well we're not doing, whatever the case may be. And most of our scores were excellent. I mean, we're asking about how safe do you feel like our environment is? How well do you think we partner with you and resource you? Things like that. But there was one question that got one of our lowest scores, and that was this. We asked them if they think their kids have friends at church. Like, do you feel like your kids are building friendships at church? And the score was way lower than it should have been. And still a decent score. But, to me, when we're doing these surveys, if you're getting lots of 3s and 4s instead of 4s and 5s, then I think there's a problem, right? Like, we're not talking about terrible like 1s and 2s, but like if we're living in the 3s and 4s for that question, like what's going on? Are we not building the kind of community that we hope? Because we talk about relationships all the time. Like meaningful relationships for us are a pillar for our kids and really every group of people in our church. And so where's the miss? We've got really great content. We got rave reviews about content and programming, and parents think it's helping their kids grow and all that stuff. But there's this one area where, okay, because we surveyed parents, now we have an idea of like how well we're doing at actually building community at the level of a kid. And, I'm excited because in a week or so, we're going to do a survey to kids. And what I love doing here is actually comparing the different audiences to see what they say. So really, a lot of what we do is we aggregate, different categories. So if we ask about our content to our volunteers, and we ask another question about our content to our parents, and the same thing for kids and staff, what we can do then is aggregate all of those totals into a single score and say, what does everybody think about our new programming, right? And so we can take different things like that. So there are a couple key things that we'll aggregate, like how well are we doing at partnering with parents? Like how well are we doing in helping kids grow? What do people think of our content and its effectiveness? And so we'll, talk to all the audiences. And in this case, we're going to ask our kids, hey, do you feel like you have friends at church? And then we'll discover, is there a disconnect between like what a kid feels and what a parent's interpretation of it might be? Who knows? They could be the same. They probably should be the same. But what if there's a difference? So that kind of helps us keep some checks and balances in the data we're getting, and and make sure that really the conclusions we're coming to are conclusions that are valid. So it's super fun. And even for kids, man, we do a paper survey, and we do it with emojis. And so we turn it into a game in our large group time. That's for awesome. Elementary age kids. So our host, like next weekend, like they're going to get up there and they're going to walk them through each question in a fun way. And then the kids are just going to circle the emoji that best represents their response to the question. So, surveys don't have to be boring. We made it fun. So that helps us just know what's working, what's not, and know where to invest more of our energy.
That's great. Well, with the little time we have left, I'd love to hear about another challenge or something that's going well, or something you're working on there at Sandals with the kids ministry. What comes to mind?
I think, man, the thing that keeps me up at night is always people. Not like bad people. I wasn't going to go into one of those things, but really, I think the biggest challenge we're facing is not having a big enough vision. It's not having enough excitement or enthusiasm in our church about the future. We have that by the boatload, but I think what we need are people who can help us make that vision happen. Our executive pastor, Dan Zimbardi, is an incredible leader. And when he first came into this position at our church some years ago, he mentioned something called the vision gap. And, what he realized is our pastor had this really big vision, and there were a lot of exciting, things and plans and whatever that our church had for the future, but there's a gap between what the dream was and what the resources were. So in terms of financial resources and people resources, having the right leaders to go and be a campus pastor at our next location or the next kids lead at that location, there was a gap there between what we wanted and the resources that were currently available to us. And so as leaders, we've got to focus on addressing that gap, because that's going to be the biggest barrier, I think, to our future growth. So yeah, man, the thing that I really think about more than anything else is how we're investing in people. And so over the last year, we've just really turned our attention to our kids ministry to figure out how do we identify and develop potential leaders within our ministry. And it starts with some basic training for team members, but then it also comes down to identifying what are the leadership levels. I've heard, I think you talk about this. I know you guys have done some work with Mac Lake in the past. I worked with him at a previous church, and some of his ideas about creating a pipeline, levels of leadership, and creating a plan for how to get from one level to the next. We've taken some of that mentality and adopted it in our kids ministry, and really started to address, man, how do I get somebody who's a team member and prepare them to be a team leader? And then when I have a team leader, how do I develop them to be a ministry leader? How can I develop them to be the kind of person who could be a staff person one day at one of our next campuses? And so, 82% of our kids ministry staff, like the kids leads we have at our campuses, were homegrown. They're people who were already in our kids ministry. They were leading teams of volunteers as a volunteer. And when an opportunity came up, we hired them. And, so I'm thinking, how do we create a system for that, of identifying those kinds of homegrown leaders and preparing them to step into roles? So that's the thing that's been taking a lot of my attention lately, is figuring out that strategy, creating resources, creating a leadership track from one thing to the next. And we're experimenting with some things, but that's the stuff that's taken up a good amount of my headspace these days.
Any quick tips or things you'd offer? I mean, I know for you, launching 7 campuses in 3 years, a lot of it is that homegrown from volunteer to staff. But for people listening, if they're interested in that, that's awesome. But there are a lot, I know everybody's probably interested. How do we get from volunteer who's serving in a good way, but then leading, or leading to leading even a higher level, like that kind of development? Is there anything you think of that's well, this is working, this is a tip I'd offer, or anything like that?
Yeah, man. I'll share the short version of kind of some things we do that I think could help some other people. And if we have time, feel free to ask questions and poke and prod. But, once we identified level 1 of being a team member and then level 2 of being a team leader, what we did is identify, and this is just Mac Lake's strategy that we're implementing here, so I'm not taking credit for this, but what I would challenge people to do is define what the next level looks like, and then define what the key competencies are to lead well at that level. And so for us, a team leader who would be responsible for a number of volunteers, we defined a handful of core competencies that will make or break your leadership. These are the skills you need to have to be a great team leader. And what we did is, for each of those competencies, we created some content around it. And we said, hey, here's a blog post you can read about this stuff. Here's a video you can watch, or a podcast you can listen to. And then we spend time together in groups unpacking that together, and it allows time for coaching and development. And so once you guide them through all of those modules, whatever it is you might create, by the end of that, they're going to be a lot more prepared than if you hadn't done that. And so that's step 1, is identify what the next level is, and then identify what people actually need to get there. What are the tools, the skills, and the competencies that they're going to need at that next level, and then figure out how to actually teach those things to those people. That's what I would say. What we learned is that to get from level 1 to level 2, those kind of modules are sufficient. From level 2 to level 3, if you're making the jump from leading volunteers to leading multiple team leaders, or even the jump to becoming a staff person, typically a class isn't going to be the thing that helps you become that kind of leader. It could be, maybe someone out there has some really great classes, but what I've found is what they need more than a class is really a coach. And so here's what I would say, and people can apply this wherever they're at. What we do for our process here is not a formal class. Actually, to develop people at this point, we kind of have an informal strategy that I'm kind of taking from our executive pastor. And here's what we do. Let's say you identify a potential leader. So you've got somebody you think they could actually like lead at the next level. What I always do is I start by giving them a task, something that's related to this future opportunity I have in mind for them, right? And so, for instance, a one-time task could be, hey, I want you to lead a huddle with this group of volunteers before our service. And so I'm going to watch and I'm going to see how they do when they lead a huddle. Like, can they communicate well with their team? Are they organized? Are they on time? Like, how do volunteers respond to them when they lead things like this? How are they being experienced? Things like that. So I'll start by giving them a one-time task. And if they do really well, I might give them another task or something like that. And all the while, they don't realize I'm auditioning them a little bit, right? So I'm watching carefully how they do at that task that applies to what they're going to do at the next level. And if they're faithful with some tasks, then I'm going to consider giving them a project. And so a project, perfect example, we're going to be experimenting with a VBS type program this summer. Not at all of our campuses, but at a handful. And we're going to test and see if it, reaches some of our goals before we go all in with all of our campuses. And as we do that, I need some people to take on pieces of that project. And so, I have one of our staff people who is owning the crafts experience and they're coming up with all the crafts. I've got another person that's owning the games rotation and they're doing all of that. I've got another guy who's a resident here who is doing all of the main sessions programming. So the worship, the hosting scripts, the teaching videos, all that stuff, he's coordinating that. I've got people doing projects, and while they're doing a project, notice I haven't given them official role yet. Like, I haven't given them a new title. I've given them tasks. Now I'm giving them a project. They still don't know they're being auditioned for something, but I get to watch and see how they handle that project. I get to see if they succeed or if they fail, if they have a hard time with it. And I get to see if they're actually ready for this newer, bigger role that I have in mind for them. And so once I go through tasks and then I go through projects, then I'll consider giving them a real role. Very rarely do we skip those first two things and just say, hey, you're promoted into this new role. When I mentioned earlier that 82% of our staff was homegrown, what we really did when they were homegrown is we gave them tasks. We gave them projects. And because they were faithful in those things and they showed lots of promise in those things, we had a really high degree of confidence once we offered them a role because we'd already seen that stuff. And so no matter what leadership development thing you're looking at, I think that's a helpful thing of try giving them tasks, then projects, and then a role. I think it does three things for you. Number one is you're giving those leaders a chance to get valuable experience and to actually grow, right? If you're giving them a task that's related to this newer, bigger role, you're allowing them to exercise some muscles that they haven't had to use before, and they're often going to be better for it. So they grow from it. Number two is it reduces the risk for you as a leader, right? Like, how many times have you offered a role to somebody and you're not sure if they can actually do it or not? Like, you're kind of taking a chance on them. Really, by the time you get to that point, there's not as much risk involved because you've already seen their track record by this point. And then third, it gives you a natural jumping off point, like several points along the way of like, man, if they really butcher that task or if they just, could not handle that project, there's no expectation there. Like, it was a one-time thing. And like, you learn from it. You either provide coaching and help them get better, or you just don't ask them to do that project again. And now, maybe this isn't the right fit for them. Maybe this newer, bigger role that I had in mind actually wouldn't be the best fit after all. And so I think it just helps. It helps people grow. It reduces the risk for you as a leader. It gives you some natural jumping off points so that you're not stuck with somebody who's in the wrong role over time. Because we all know how hard it is to offboard someone who is just not the right fit. So that's what I would say. That I think could be helpful at so many different levels. It could be applied in so many different ways. And so I would just encourage people to think about tasks and then projects and then roles. And I think they'll get a lot from it for sure.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, so much of what you're saying is it's kind of like on the job training or whatever. Like, they actually get to do it. I know my pastor always say, I want to say it's from Ken Blanchard, but it's a quote about leadership is about creating space. And what he means is like creating opportunities, for people to try something out and then, talk about it. Whereas a lot of times we think leadership and we do think more of the the class, the teaching, the instruction, that kind of thing. Well, I'd love to even hear more, about what is going on there. But if we can get some of your team on to talk curriculum, that'll be a lot of fun. But it sounds like you guys are doing some great things. You've had a lot of growth and probably with that, of course, a lot of change the last few years, which is awesome. If anybody, wanted to reach out or just follow you on social media or anything like that, how can people connect with you?
Probably the best way is over email. I'm not on Instagram a whole lot, so it's just my first and last name at sandalschurch.com. So Jeremy O'Neill, Oneill at sandalschurch.com. And if there are questions, things people are curious about, man, I'd be happy to help.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast and for doing the work you're doing at Sandals, man. It's making a great difference. And I've always heard of Sandals Church. It's cool to get an inside look and hear about your experience there. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with Jeremy. I didn't know Jeremy. I knew of Sandals Church. I've always known of Sandals Church, but I didn't know anything about their children's ministry. And so they're doing a lot of cool, unique stuff. So it was great to hear from him about all that. Here are a few action items I thought of coming out of that interview. One would be to survey parents in your church. And right now you might be doing that related to COVID and gathering in person again and all of that. So it might not be the season for that. In fact, we were going to do a parent survey. That has been on pause because we've been surveying for other reasons, but you can get his sample surveys in the show notes for this post at nickblevins.com/episode 193. Another action step would be to get the retention plan from Ministry Boost at ministryboost.org and then look at your retention rate. It's something with kids, especially, that you can measure at any time. So you could look at your retention rate from, how many people that were new last year, kids that were new last year attended between January and mid-March this year before your church stopped gathering with COVID. And then use the retention plan from Ministry Boost to build a better framework and a better fully functioning comprehensive plan with follow-up at every step so that as your church is gathering in person again, you're ready to help more families get connected. And then the third action step would be to check out ministryboost.org/screens. And there's a great resource that we know of. It's not ours, but we partner with an organization that has the ability to put great content on TV. So for digital signage in the lobbies of your church, in your preschool and elementary children's ministry rooms, much the same way that Jeremy's church is using their own custom Roku app, this solution can help you do that for a fraction of the price of what these things normally cost. We're using it in my church. I'll probably talk more about that once we're gathering in person again. But it is a great resource for sure. Check out Huddle Up at nickblevins.com/servehq, the tool that will help you communicate with your volunteers, with other people in the church. Maybe it's students with student ministry, whatever that looks like. And next week, we'll have Justin Knowles on the podcast to talk about student ministry at Sandals Church and what it has been like when he got there, 9 months ago, pre-COVID, and what they were doing and some of the changes they were making. And then how have they pivoted with COVID to put student ministry online, and what has the success of that been? That's our conversation next week. So be sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.